All right, we are in 1 Corinthians chapter 16. 1 Corinthians chapter 16. Just to back up a little bit, we will be picking up in verse 7. And this is in the section now, as I told you, that at the end of these books, these epistles, oftentimes, as was customary in the first century in this time period, you would include travel plans. They did not have a lot of opportunity to interact and tell people, and so if they knew one another because of someone who had traveled through and there was a chance of getting to see them again, you'd want to include that information. So what we looked at last week, and we noticed in verses 5 and 6, "Now I will come to you when I pass through Macedonia, for I am passing through Macedonia. And it may be that I will remain or even spend the winter with you, that you may send me on my journey wherever I go." And so he is letting them know that where he is right now, and we can look at he's in Ephesus, as we're going to see in a moment, but he's planning on then traveling, and if you're looking at your imaginary map, as everyone I know stores in their head of what the Mediterranean world looks like, you know, y'all ought to either say nod or just laugh, one of the two. It's okay. So Ephesus is essentially in the southwestern corner of Turkey, okay, today. That's where that is. And so to go up to Macedonia is on the other side of the Aegean Sea to the west. It would be going up north, and then Macedonia is on that quarter in the west. Whereas they would then travel down what we would think of Macedonia into Greece. This Achaia is the province. There's the southern part of where we see Greece. And then there's that isthmus there that is where you have Corinth located in that area. Okay, so he is giving them the idea of essentially going north to come south is what he is telling them. So he does this, and he says, says, "I am passing through Macedonia." So don't be surprised at this information, he's saying. But then he gives them hope. And the hope is, that he says, and it may be, notice he doesn't guarantee it, but he says, it may be that I will remain or even spend the winter with you. So my plan right now is, if all goes well, that I can come and stay a while. Maybe even the whole winter, that would work out. Okay? And remember, we talked about the need for that because of the nature of the storms on the Mediterranean. "That you may send me on my journey wherever I go." And we also talked about how that idea of send on my journey is more than just, see me off at the ship. It was provide some material assistance to make that journey possible, of some kind of financial assistance, of food, sustenance, those kind of things. That was a responsibility of hospitality that often went with those relationships. So then he says, now as we look in verse 7, "For I do not wish to see you now on the way, but I hope to stay a while with you if the Lord permits." So what is the phrase, and what is the difference between "to see you now on the way"? Say it again. Oh, I still can't get you. He's not, okay, good. Thank you, Charlotte. He's not going to have enough time. So he's in a hurry right now. He's collecting. He's doing all these other things. And so he really wants to have a plan so that when he comes through, there's actual time. And because he wants to spend. So he's showing consideration, telling them, here is where the plan is. Now, when we go and we're looking in the book of Acts of what actually is going to happen, this is what creates an issue later on. Okay, and I think it's helpful to kind of see that. So now I want us to look in verse 8 as he's explaining the current situation, and that's where we want to consider what ends up happening. "But I will tarry in Ephesus until Pentecost." Okay, so he already said he doesn't have much time, but I am going to stay here for the time being, at least until Pentecost, which, of course, time frame is spring. It's coming up, okay, in time. It's springtime. So that's what he's wanting to do. That's the plan. But I want you to note now the reasons why he gives. Okay? There are two. For a great and effective door has opened to me. That makes perfect sense as to why you'd want to stick around, doesn't it? A great and effective door. We usually see door, that's a metaphor for opportunity, right? This is a great and effective door. There are possibilities here where I am and what's going on. They're amazing. So I wanted to stick through this. But now look at the second thing he says. And there are many adversaries. I don't think that counts as a reason why to be happy to stay. Do you? There are many adversaries. So how do we understand? I will tarry in Ephesus until Pentecost for two reasons. I'm staying because there are great possibilities and because there's a potential for a lot of problems. Now, you may have trouble kind of connecting those dots, but as a preacher, I don't, because that's what you do. That's what he's supposed to do. If we are only there for the good times, then we're not doing everything we need to do. He was looking at this and saying, there are two different things he's got to deal with. There are opportunities and there are a lot of problems possible. Now, adversaries means these problems are coming from which direction? Where are they coming from, most likely? Could be the Jews. He certainly had a regular record of doing that. In this case, there's some more other than Jews, though. Yeah, well, those are our options. But specifically now, what kind of people and why are they causing problems for them? Why would make them adversaries? Raise your hand if you got a personal adversary, you know. Anybody? You ever have, okay, no one wants to admit to it? Okay. Boy, this guy, I had a guy in high school once, man. I don't know what I did to him, but adversary. Did not like me. And so you do different things, trying to make your life miserable in different ways. Okay? Well, there were different people who would do that to Paul because he was preaching. But these were coming from outside. So he sees all sorts of positive possibilities for the church there in Ephesus. And if we go back into Acts, he is set up in the school of Tyrannus, and he is teaching people and sending them out since Ephesus was on the coast, he was sending them into the interior. That's how the church at Colossae was established. And he wrote the Colossians just a few years later. They didn't know him personally, but they certainly knew who he was because the man who went there had been taught by Paul. He was doing great work here and just working indirectly through others to make it possible for other people to be saved. A great work, great door. But at the same time, there's pressure for you to close up shop. Now, you're right that the ongoing problem were Judaizing teachers. That's one of the reasons why as we talked about the collection, why he wanted to do that was he's wanting to try to unify the church and to get them all on the same page as he's going back. That's one of the things he's wanted to accomplish by that. The other thing that comes up is found in Acts 19. Okay? In Acts 19, we find that Paul is in Ephesus, and he's being very successful, so we see evidence in Acts of just how successful that door of opportunity has been. Because his success has created a stir in a local union. Okay, now, technically, they weren't unions then, they were trade guilds. Okay? But he had made such inroads that the Silversmith Trade Guild felt like their entire livelihood was threatened because pagans were giving up their idolatry. And if you're a silversmith in the first century, one of your main ways to make money was creating homemade, these worked out idols for your home altar, as well as the main ones if you were good. But they also sold, and you find this in archaeology all the time, of these little little smaller figurines for your home altar. So if all these people are giving up, the big temples, they weren't necessarily. You go in the whole idea of great is Diana of the Ephesians. Okay, they were the headquarters. Matter of fact, that was a wonder of the world. It was huge. But that wasn't the ongoing, it was the people who were, because they were adherents to Diana, would get things made. And if that starts doing it, and they start trailing off, now we're cutting into my income. So because of this is when Demetrius, the silversmith, goes in, calls a meeting of the trade guild in this area where they would meet in Ephesus. You can still, to this day, did you go to that area? It is still there, and you can go to where they had the common meetings in Ephesus. Okay, you remember when John Moore was here? Okay, that's one possibility. You can go there and sit in an amphitheater where this most likely occurred. And what was the point of it? Is to get everyone excited and say something's got to be done about this Paul character. He's causing us so many problems. And if he keeps this up, we won't have any jobs, essentially. That's where I want you to connect the dots to understand when we talk about adversaries, the idea of the ongoing problem he'd had with Judaizing teachers, but also from the outside, particularly in Ephesus, he knew what he was doing. Now, that is of particular importance, though, to be able to connect the dots of what's going on here in Acts 16 and what's going to happen in, Acts 19, 1 Corinthians 16, and then 2 Corinthians 1. Because he's given his instruction and telling his plans, but something happens. Because that situation with Demetrius hasn't happened yet when he writes this letter. He knows that it's becoming a problem, but that hasn't happened yet. What ends up happening then is all of that, when we go over to Acts, we find that it's such a problem that's been created that he has to change his plans. So if you go over to Acts 19, and this assembly has been dismissed, I mean, it was a major problem. But then in chapter 20 and verse 1, it says this: after the uproar had ceased, Paul called the disciples to himself, embraced them, and departed to go to Macedonia. Okay, now he'd said that was part of what he was going to do, going to Macedonia from 1 Corinthians. Now, if you get into the first chapter of 2 Corinthians now, I want you to look, and I want to read beginning in verse 3 of chapter 1. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our tribulation, that we may be able to comfort those who are in any trouble with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God. For as the sufferings of Christ abound in us, so our consolation also abounds through Christ. Now if we are afflicted, it is for your consolation and salvation, which is effective for enduring the same sufferings which we also suffer. Or if we are comforted, it is for your consolation and salvation. And our hope for you is steadfast, because we know that as you are partakers of the suffering, so also you will partake of the consolation. Now notice verse 8. For we do not want you to be ignorant, brethren, of our trouble which came to us in Asia. That's the province where Ephesus is. that we were burdened beyond measure, above strength, so that we despaired even of life. Yes, we had the sentence of death in ourselves, that we should not trust in ourselves, but in God who raises the dead, who delivered us from so great a death, and does deliver us, in whom we trust, that he will still deliver us. You also helping together in prayer for us, that thanks may be given for many persons on our behalf for the gift granted to us through many. Now, what happens next in 2 Corinthians is he's needing to explain then how this affected his travel plans. So I just wanted to kind of help you understand the need to go back and see the context and how that relates between all of these, and it starts to fill in some of the gaps that we don't have to guess at of what was actually happening. So now we want to look, he's telling them, here's what I'm planning on doing, but now he's going to do something that I think is kind of interesting, is he's going to provide some other travel plans. So let's go ahead and read, beginning in verse 10. And if Timothy comes, see that he may be with you without fear, for he does the work of the Lord as I also do. Now, who is Paul writing to? Christians. He's writing to Christians, and who is Timothy? He's a preacher, right? And Paul is sending a message, if Timothy come, okay, so there's a possibility, okay, so that you need to be prepared. See that he may be with you without fear. Now, we've established then that Corinth is a congregation of Christians, congregation of the Lord's church. Timothy's a gospel preacher. And the instruction that Paul thinks he needs to give to the Corinthians is, don't scare off Timothy. Right? All right, so now I want you to think with me, what exactly would make that problem possible? Why does Paul need to say something? Okay, his youth. Okay. Yeah, two problems come up that we immediately can see. Number one, Timothy is younger. Now, he could be at this point, okay, when this is written, very easily be 30. Okay, so but he's still young, especially if you're dealing with a lot of people who are older. But now we go in the other problem is, look at everything. If this was the result in 1 Corinthians, right? All that we've been looking at, all these problems, this is after Paul had been talking to them and taught them. This is what they get. So we can have some issues here, I think. Later on, that is said, that is correct. In 1 Timothy chapter 5, it doesn't say specifically that he was nervous, but he did have some kind of stomach ailment. So there was maybe a weaker constitution, possibly. Could be. I also saw another, yes. Possibly. Now we're speculating here, but I do want to actually go there in just a moment about when we're making the application. Yeah, Charlotte. Okay. Now you'd think that that'd be a perfect match, though, for Corinth, which has both Jew and Greek. It's a mixed congregation. You'd think Timothy would be a great person for that, wouldn't it? But it also, the indication is, when you read about in 1 and 2 Timothy, that he was just a milder personality. Right? He loved Jesus, he loved the gospel, he loved to teach and preach, but that he was not necessarily a powerful personality. Now, the reason why I want to point this out is some people tend to think and judge whether someone can be a preacher based upon their personality and how effective they can be. And I just want to remind you, you give me somebody of character who loves the Lord over someone with a big personality every time. Okay? And that we need to be looking for issues of character, knowledge, their work, not external kind of things. Okay? That's one of the things that I want to emphasize. But that was an issue here. The potential too is, do you get the picture as we go through Corinthians that there are some big personalities in Corinth? I mean, you've got competing elements going to chapter 1, right? You've got elements of schism, and they're strong enough, number one, where one person isn't just carrying the day. They've got multiple people, going there. They've got their guy, and we got this problem, and then they're going to be big on the outside. We know that they were important to have some people in it that were rather strong and wealthy. They had wealth, they had big personalities, and here is this younger, milder-mannered preacher sent by Paul going back into this congregation that has all sorts of issues. I always wonder at this moment, what did Paul tell Timothy? Right? We don't know that. But it'd be kind of interesting. What were the instructions to Timothy if these were the instructions to Corinth? But that actually, I bring that up to point this out. It's important for you as a congregation to know yourself just as much as it is for a preacher. Know who you are and why in your interactions. And then to be able to, it's about that relationship. This fact here is that for things to work well depends upon each appreciating who the other is and working with that, rather than who you are not. Okay, so that's one of the things that I think is really important that I see. Why? For he does the work of the Lord. Now notice this, as I also do. We think of Paul, I would say most people, you have the Lord and then there's Paul, right? He's just right down. Peter is somewhere in the mix, but we're still not sure about him. Paul had a strong personality, and yet whenever he mentioned his work with any of those who followed with him that he sent out, it was always with such humility and interest in them. Every time. Why? Because it wasn't about Paul. Paul cared about those guys. Okay? So, what is he doing here? He does the work of the Lord, as I do. He's in the same thing. Now, Timothy wasn't an apostle. But that wasn't the most important thing to Paul. They were both gospel preachers. So you guys, guess what Paul just did for you? You're doing the work of the Lord as Paul does. That's the way Paul sees it. Therefore, verse 11, therefore let no one despise him. Now we see later on when Paul is writing to Timothy, he says in 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 12, let no man despise your youth, right? But now he's on the other side of telling them, don't despise him. Now what does it mean to despise somebody? We need to work on this word because I don't think it carries exactly the same idea. Does anyone have a translational difference that might help us here? Everybody says despise. Treat with contempt is pretty good. If you wanted to get as literal as possible, it'd probably be you treat them as if they're nothing, which is that idea. I want you to imagine then, Timothy shows up, okay, a Sunday morning. They've received the letter, hopefully had time to straighten their act up a little bit. Timothy comes on the scene, walks in. Remember me? I'm Timothy. Paul sent me. And everyone's like, whatever. We got other things to go on here. I'm sorry, Timothy. I know that Paul said you need to come and you had something to say, but we've already established plans. So I want you to think about where in the chapter 1, just for the idea of symmetry in writing a literary work here. In chapter 1, the problem is they were elevating certain men. And in chapter 16, Paul is worried about them treating men with contempt. Why do people do that? Why do we do that? What does that mean?
It's common for people to have arrogance and pride, and it's very, very easy to look down on someone who you don't consider in your socioeconomic.
Okay, good. Socioeconomic circles could be part of it. Is it who does he think he is? I'd like to broaden that just a little. I think you're right. I'd like to broaden it too. You're just not in our group. You don't belong in this group. And if you're not, especially when, remember, they definitely liked their groups. We see that, right? They've got their groups. So Timothy wasn't in any of those. Okay? I am of Paul, I am of Apollos, I am of Cephas, I am of Christ. Timothy wasn't mentioned. Okay, so he didn't have that kind of status. So now what do you get to is that, well, he's not really in that kind of circle. I mean, he was definitely in Paul's circle, if you will, but he wasn't Paul. And it's interesting, say, of how we will have, do we love the gospel? Or do we love certain people preaching the gospel? Too hard? And I think about it. No, that doesn't, look, there's going to be differences of who's better at just certain ways of presenting. I get that. I mean, that's why we try to work hard on the homiletics and everything. But I want to make sure that I think about how sometimes people are going to hear the man, not the message. Somebody can get a big crowd for a really basic lesson, and a man who has really put study in, not as well known, but he's going to go into this text. Well, I haven't ever heard of him. And this is the basis of our judgments. Okay? That shouldn't be how we think. No, we ought to want the gospel presented the very best way possible, right? We should. But I also know that there have been a lot of people saved from people who are completely untrained, who simply love the gospel, love souls, and love Jesus. And maybe they stumbled around finding their verses, but they taught someone who's now going to heaven. I just want to make sure, because of what he says here, that we do not allow ourselves to slip into a worldly way of evaluating things. We can still appreciate quality. We should. Okay? We should aim for the best quality we can. But I want to make sure we never end up where we've placed that quality above the message. Because our job is to serve the message. And that's what is the challenge of someone who takes that sincerely and is going to kind of always be stepping back, not putting themselves forward, then maybe it's easy to just kind of run over them some. We don't want to do that. We want to be a people who can respect that message presented for its truth and its sincerity and then the character behind it, because it's a message about Jesus that's inspired by the Holy Spirit, given by God, that it's what determines the direction I go with my life and whether or not I go to heaven or hell. Let no one despise him. So let's make sure when we're looking, and I think that the direct application here is to Timothy, but I want to make sure we never get to where we see anybody in that way, that we see potential, spiritual potential, not worldly flaws. Because that's the only way that we ultimately ever teach anyone is when we see their spiritual potential, not their worldly flaws, right? Well, this is just extending that a little bit. So let's look again. The second sentence in verse 11. But send him on his journey in peace, that he may come to me, for I'm waiting for him with the brethren. So sometime before, Paul has sent Timothy out, and Timothy's long-term plan was to get to Corinth. And this is what he's now saying, knowing that the expectation is this letter is going to arrive before Timothy. And he already said, I want you to send me forth on my journey. And now he says, send him on his journey in peace. What does that mean, in peace? Now this may take a little bit of, in the background info, but I want to see how much maybe you already have heard. No striving, don't cause a problem, partly. Don't do anything to make him discouraged, partly. Peace, actually, it's hard to tell completely, because the Hebrew word you've heard, right? You know the Hebrew word for peace, shalom. Okay? Still used as a greeting. Okay? But it actually, we think about peace, like the difference is, we tend to think of peace as just simply no conflict, right? So it depends a little bit on how much the Hebrew meaning of peace might have affected generally what Paul is saying here, he being a Jew. Because it meant a lot more than that. It was a word that indicated not simply the idea of no war. It meant far more than no internal conflicts, but it was rather an idea of hoping and wishing for the absolute best for someone. It was a looking forward that in every way in your life, things are in harmony and right, so that you can be kind of at rest. So it's the positive of what he said, don't do this. Instead, treat him in such a way that when he leaves only feeling good about who you are. Don't do the things that would cause him, look down on him, but instead, when he leaves, make sure that he sees you as truly being people who love God and love him. That's to send him forth in peace, that full idea would be true. Right. Yeah. Yes. It's not just, okay, we're showing up because Paul told us we have to. Okay, it's with a have to kind of sense of, all right, get on the gangway already. It was truly to have a lot warmth of basically saying, give him a chance and learn to love him the way I do. And then send him on well. He's doing good, important work. That he may come to me. Because now in saying this, Paul is indicating how much Timothy means to him. That Timothy means something. You send him on because I need him. For I am waiting for him with the brethren. Now he took it. If you notice what has happened in this verse, because notice the flow in one short verse, what Paul has done for you to, how he's trying to adjust the way they might see Timothy. We start with, let no one despise him. Avoid the negative behavior. But send him on his journey in peace. Positive behavior. That he may come to me. Correct, stronger association with Paul. And then, for I am waiting him with the brethren. He has a larger purpose. You see what he just did there? Yes. I think that is exactly right. It's an emotional appeal to them to be open to him emotionally and show him positive emotion. And I think that it's another way of saying, okay, we have someone who needs encouragement. That's just who Timothy was. He needed a lot. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just but go what? Take that on and say, that's important for me toward him. Verse 12. Now we introduce yet another figure that we've seen before, going all the way back to the earlier portion of the book. Now concerning our brother Apollos, I strongly urged him to come to you with the brethren, but he was quite unwilling to come at this time. However, he will come when he has a convenient time. Okay, now this is interesting because of the contrast in personalities. Timothy is Paul's right-hand man. He's the younger man. He's known since Timothy was a youth. Took him on board on that missionary journey. He's going to take him on early on. He's been traveling with him ever since. Apollos is someone that Paul ran in Ephesus now. Becomes familiar with that work. If you remember, in chapter 18 was where Aquila and Priscilla taught him more perfectly at the end. And then Paul, you had this thing where he is leaving and that Paul's coming into Ephesus. That's where this all happens. So Paul we don't know if how much there was of meeting up at all. It would indicate that maybe some or just that great familiarity. But if he said, I strongly urge you, that seems to indicate that they did see one another. Because now we go back and he's aware that during this intervening time, he's gone over and had an influence over in Corinth. But now he's left at some point. And so now Paul has had instructions and had a conversation with him. Now let's just think about this a little bit now. Apostle Paul comes up to you and says, hey, you need to go and visit those brethren in Corinth. I'm writing them. They got some issues here, and we're part of it here. You need to go over there and see them. And you say to Apostle Paul, nah, I got something else going on. Wow. Okay. I want you to see the difference between the Timothy-Paul relationship and the Paul-Apollos relationship. Apollos was his own man. He was a strong personality, big voice, apparently, and eloquent from what we see in Acts 18, and confident. Don't seem to get that from Timothy. Paul is then presenting Timothy and bolstering him up. And then he is saying, hey guys, I did my best with Apollos, but you knew how he is. But he can handle it. I mean, when each one of them, he's dealing with them according to who they are and what they need. I strongly urged him to come to you with the brethren. So he wanted him to come along. He says he was unwilling to. Now, I've been joking a little bit with you just for perspective, but I want you to think about this from a way in which the church worked. That it was possible for somebody who is simply a preacher in the early church to tell the Apostle Paul no. Now, this was not about right or wrong. It was about Paul wanted him to do something. And for the way in which many people look in the world, they fail to understand this basic thing that Paul did not have the ability to command people to do whatever he wanted them to do in personal life. An apostle, that wasn't his authority was not person authority, it was the gospel in him authority. And that's not what this was about. And so he will come when he has a convenient time. David? Mm-hmm. Right. That's right. We didn't. Yeah, that's right. We didn't see eye to eye about the timing on this, but that's okay. It was his call, and I like to think that maybe everything maybe he learned something with Barnabas from the end of Acts 14. Anyway, okay, we will pick up there. Remember, I will be gone next week. We will pick up in verse 13.